The crash of splintering wood jolted Henrik Brennan from his bed, and he grabbed the axe by his door before his mind fully caught up with his body. Through the howling wind that had torn his shutters free, snow spiraled into his small cabin like vengeful spirits, and there in his doorway stood a figure cloaked in white, collapsing forward onto the rough-hewn floorboards. Henrik kicked the door shut against the blizzard's fury, then knelt beside what he now saw was a woman, her green skin stark against the pale snow that clung to her ragged cloak. An orc. Henrik's first instinct was to reach for his axe again, years of frontier warnings echoing in his skull, but the woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing amber irises filled not with rage but with fear so raw it stopped his hand mid-reach. Blood seeped through the fabric at her side, dark and worrying, and her tusks chattered with cold as she tried to speak. "Please," she managed, her voice hoarse and desperate. "They are hunting me. I did not know where else to run." Henrik glanced toward the window where the blizzard painted the world an impenetrable white. No one would be hunting anyone in this storm, not tonight. He had maybe 6 hours before anyone could follow a trail, and by then, the snow would have buried everything anyway. He made his decision in a heartbeat, hauling the woman up with surprising difficulty given her lean frame, and guided her to his bed. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice steady. "But that wound needs attention. Can you sit up?" She managed to prop herself against his pillows, watching him with the wariness of a cornered animal as he gathered his medical supplies. His grandmother had been a healer, and she had taught him well before the fever took her 3 winters past. Henrik kept his movements slow and visible as he approached, setting the supplies on the small table beside the bed. "My name is Henrik," he offered. "I am going to need to see that wound." "Shara," she whispered. "Shara Coldforge, you should not help me. If they find me here, they will kill you too." Her fingers fumbled with the clasps of her cloak, and Henrik noticed the trembling was not just from cold but from exhaustion. He gently moved her hands aside and helped her remove the heavy fabric, revealing a torn dress beneath, simple homespun that had once been blue, but was now stained with dirt and blood. The wound in her side was a gash from something sharp, not deep enough to be fatal but ragged enough to need stitching. "Who is hunting you?" Henrik asked as he threaded his needle, heating it first in the candle flame. "My clan," Shara said, and her voice cracked on the words. "I was meant to marry their war chief tomorrow. He is cruel, Henrik. He has killed 2 wives already, claimed they displeased him. I could not. I would not." She broke off as Henrik pressed a clean cloth soaked in whiskey to her wound, hissing through her teeth. "This will hurt," he warned, though he knew he was too late. "But it needs to be cleaned." Shara nodded, gripping the bed frame with white-knuckled intensity as Henrik worked. Her muscles were taut beneath her skin, and he could see the evidence of a hard life in the scars that crossed her arms and shoulders. She had been a warrior once, or perhaps still was, and the thought made him wonder what desperation had driven her to flee rather than fight. "Why did you come to human lands?" Henrik asked, partly to distract her as he began stitching. "Your clan will have no mercy for that." "Because they would not think to look here," Shara said, her words coming through gritted teeth. "Humans and orcs do not mix. It is forbidden on both sides. I thought perhaps I could hide until I found a way further south, to the free territories where clan law does not reach." Henrik tied off the final stitch and applied a poultice his grandmother had sworn by, then wrapped clean linen around Shara's torso. The intimacy of the act was not lost on him, and he tried to maintain a clinical detachment even as he noticed the way her skin felt warm beneath his fingers, the way her breath caught when he pulled the bandage snug. "You need rest," he said, stepping back. "I will take the floor tonight." I cannot take your bed, Shara protested, trying to rise, but Henrik pressed a hand to her shoulder. You are injured and half frozen. I have survived worse than a night on my own floor. Sleep, Shara Coldforge. We will figure out what comes next when the storm breaks. But the storm did not break. When Henrik woke the next morning, stiff from his makeshift pallet of furs near the fire, the world beyond his windows was still a swirling mass of white. The blizzard had intensified overnight, and the snow had drifted high enough to bury his door completely. They were sealed in, trapped together until the weather chose to release them. Shara was awake, sitting up in bed with her hand pressed to her bandaged side. Her eyes tracked Henrik as he moved to check the door, confirming what he already suspected. We are snowed in, he announced, turning to face her. Could be a day, could be 3. I have supplies enough for both of us, but we are not going anywhere until this passes. Something flickered across Shara's face, an emotion Henrik could not quite name. Relief, fear, perhaps both. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and he noticed she had removed the torn dress at some point in the night, leaving her in what looked like a simple undershift. I am sorry, she said. You did not ask for this burden. No one asks for a blizzard, Henrik replied, moving to stoke the fire. And you are not a burden. You are a person in need, and I was raised to help where I can. He set about making breakfast, simple porridge with dried berries and a bit of honey, and was surprised when Shara insisted on leaving the bed to help despite his protests. She moved carefully, favoring her injured side, but there was a determination in her jaw that told him arguing would be pointless. They ate in comfortable silence, and Henrik found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guest. In the morning light, with color returning to her cheeks, Shara was striking in a way that caught him off guard. Her features were strong and angular, her tusks small enough to be elegant rather than intimidating, and her hair, once he looked past the tangles, was a deep black that caught red highlights from the fire. You are staring, Shara observed, not looking up from her bowl. Henrik felt heat creep up his neck. Forgive me. I have never actually spoken to an orc before. We see your kind from a distance sometimes, but the elders always warned us to avoid contact. Your elders were probably wise, Shara said, but there was no bitterness in her tone, only resignation. My people say the same about humans. We are taught that you are weak, deceitful, that you would betray us at the first opportunity. Do you believe that? Henrik asked. Shara met his eyes, and something in her gaze made his breath catch. I did. Yesterday I did. Now I am not certain what I believe. The first day passed slowly, measured out in small domestic tasks. Henrik showed Shara where he kept his supplies, how to work the fire, the rhythm of his daily routine. She proved a quick study, and he noticed how her hands moved with practiced efficiency when she helped him prepare the evening meal. They talked in fits and starts, sharing pieces of their lives like traders bartering goods. Henrik learned that Shara had been a scout for her clan, that she knew the mountain passes better than anyone except perhaps the eagles, that she had never wanted to be a warrior, but had been given no choice after her father died in a border skirmish. Shara learned that Henrik had been a soldier once, that he had seen enough blood and death to last a lifetime, that he had chosen this isolated homestead specifically because it meant he would never have to take another life. Why did you stop fighting? Shara asked as they sat by the fire that evening, the storm still raging beyond the walls. Henrik was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. Because I realized I was good at it. Too good. It stopped bothering me, the killing. That was when I knew I had to walk away before I lost whatever humanity I had left. Shara shifted closer, close enough that Henrik could feel the warmth radiating from her. That is why you helped me, because you needed to prove you still could. Maybe, Henrik admitted. Or maybe I just could not stand the thought of letting you freeze on my doorstep. The second day brought a strange intimacy born of proximity and shared space. The cabin was small, and there was only so much avoiding each other they could do. Henrik changed Shara's bandages and was relieved to see the wound healing cleanly, showing no signs of infection. Her skin was smooth under his touch, and he had to remind himself to focus on the medical aspects of the task, and not on the way his pulse quickened when she looked at him. Shara, for her part, seemed to be relaxing around him degree by degree. She smiled more readily, and Henrik discovered she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. When he accidentally knocked over a bowl of dried beans, sending them scattering across the floor, she laughed in a way that transformed her face entirely. "Very graceful," she teased, kneeling to help him gather the beans despite his protests about her injury. "I live alone," Henrik said defensively. "I am allowed to be clumsy when no one is watching." "I am watching now," Shara pointed out, her eyes sparkling with mischief. They ended up on the floor together, hands occasionally brushing as they collected beans, and Henrik became acutely aware of how close she was, how he could smell the herbal scent of the soap he had given her for washing. When their fingers touched over the same bean, Shara froze, her gaze locking with his. "Henrik," she started, then stopped, seeming to lose whatever words she had been about to say. "Yes," he prompted, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "Thank you," she said finally, "for treating me like a person, not a monster." "You are not a monster," Henrik said firmly. "Anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool." That night, as they prepared for bed, Shara hesitated. "I can take the floor tonight. You have been kind enough." "Your wound needs another day or two before you should be sleeping on hard surfaces," Henrik argued. "I am fine, truly." But when he woke in the early hours of the morning, shivering despite the banked fire, he found Shara kneeling beside him with an extra blanket. "You are freezing," she said simply. "There is room enough in the bed for both of us, and I promise I do not bite much." Henrik knew he should refuse, knew that sharing a bed with this woman crossed some invisible line he had drawn in his mind, but the cold had seeped into his bones, and the offer was too tempting. He followed her to the bed, and they lay down with careful space between them, both acutely aware of the other's presence. "Is this proper?" Henrik asked the darkness. "We are already improper by every standard either of our peoples would recognize," Shara replied. "A human and an orc alone together is forbidden enough. What is sharing a bed for warmth compared to that?" She had a point, and Henrik let himself relax into the mattress, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. The bed was narrow enough that he could feel Shara's warmth without touching her, and he drifted off to sleep listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. When he woke, dawn light was filtering through the shutters, and Shara was curled against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. Henrik held perfectly still, not wanting to wake her, and allowed himself a moment to simply observe. In sleep, the wariness had left her face, and she looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way she never permitted herself while awake. Her hand rested on his chest, and he could feel the calluses on her palm, the evidence of a life spent holding weapons and working with her hands. Something in his chest tightened, a feeling he had not experienced in years, and had never expected to feel for someone so different from himself. It was dangerous, this growing attachment, but Henrik could not seem to stop it any more than he could stop the storm outside. Shara stirred, her eyes opening slowly, and there was a moment of disorientation before she realized where she was. She started to pull away, but Henrik found himself tightening his arm around her waist, keeping her close. "Stay," he said softly. "Just a moment longer." Shara relaxed against him, and they lay there in the gray morning light, neither speaking, both knowing that something had shifted between them in the night. Finally, practicality won out, and they rose to face the day. The third day dawned with a noticeable decrease in the wind's fury. The storm was weakening, and Henrik knew they had perhaps one more day before the world would become passable again. The knowledge hung between them unspoken, adding weight to every interaction. They worked side by side preparing the midday meal, and their movements had taken on a practiced synchronicity. When Henrik reached for the salt, Shara handed it to him without being asked. When Shara needed the cutting board, Henrik had already set it within reach. It felt natural in a way that should have taken weeks or months to develop, not mere days. "What will you do when the storm breaks?" Henrik asked as they ate, finally voicing the question that had been haunting him. Shara set down her spoon, her expression troubled. "I should keep moving south. My clan will not stop looking, and every day I stay in one place increases the danger, not just to me but to anyone who helps me." "What if you did not have to run?" Henrik said, the idea forming even as he spoke. "What if you stayed here?" "Henrik, we have discussed this." "If they find me, then we tell them you are under my protection," Henrik interrupted. "Frontier law allows for anyone to claim sanctuary on homesteaded land. Your clan has no authority here." "Frontier law will not stop a dozen armed orc warriors bent on restoring their honor," Shara said, but her voice held a note of longing that gave Henrik hope. "Maybe not," he conceded. "But I am not without skills myself, and this cabin is defensible. More importantly, Shara, I do not want you to go. These past few days, having you here," he stopped, struggling to articulate feelings he barely understood himself. "I have been alone for 3 years by choice. I thought I preferred it. But you have reminded me what it is like to share space with another person, to talk and laugh and simply exist alongside someone. I do not want to go back to being alone." Shara stared at him, her amber eyes wide. "You do not know what you are asking. My people will not simply accept this. And even if we could somehow make them understand, human settlements will not welcome an orc living among them. We would be outcasts from both our worlds." "I am already an outcast," Henrik said. "I chose this isolated life specifically to avoid being part of any community. And as for your clan, let them come. We will face that together when and if it happens." "Together," Shara repeated, tasting the word. "You would truly do that? Stand against my entire clan for someone you have known less than a week?" Henrik reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were strong and warm, and they curled around his with a grip that felt like coming home. "I know it is fast. I know it makes no logical sense. But Shara, I feel more alive with you here than I have in years. I see you, not what you are supposed to be or what others expect you to be, but you. And what I see is someone brave and clever and kind, someone who ran from a fate she could not accept and survived against impossible odds. Someone I would very much like to keep seeing every morning when I wake up." Tears gathered in Shara's eyes, and one escaped to trail down her cheek. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to hope for this because losing it would break me." Henrik stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. He cupped her face gently, wiping away the tear with his thumb. "Then let us both be afraid together, but let us also be brave enough to try." Shara kissed him then, a fierce and desperate press of lips that tasted of salt and hope and promise. Henrik kissed her back, his hands sliding into her hair, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Shara rested her forehead against his. "If we do this," she said, "if I stay, there is no going back. You understand that? My clan will come, probably within a week of the thaw. They will demand I return to fulfill my obligation. Then we will explain that you have a new obligation, Henrik said. To me, to us. They will not accept words, Shara warned. In my culture, such a claim would need to be formalized, a bond witnessed and recognized. Are you saying we would need to marry? Henrik asked, and was surprised to find the idea did not frighten him as much as it probably should have. In essence, yes. Though orc bonding customs are different from human marriage, it would require blood and vow and the exchange of tokens. But Henrik, you should not make such a promise lightly. Once done, my people consider it unbreakable. Henrik was quiet for a moment, considering the enormity of what he was contemplating. Then he thought of the past 3 days, of Shara's laugh, of the way she hummed while cooking, of waking with her in his arms. He thought of the empty years stretching ahead if he let her walk away, and the choice suddenly seemed remarkably simple. Teach me, he said. Teach me what needs to be done. The storm finally broke on the 4th morning, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white and utterly silent. Henrik and Shara stood at the door of the cabin, looking out at the transformed landscape, and both knew their time of isolation was ending. They spent the day preparing, both for practical survival and for what was to come. Henrik showed Shara his defenses, the reinforced door and shutters, the weapons cache he maintained despite his vow never to fight again. Shara taught him the words he would need to speak, the specific cuts they would make, the meaning behind each element of the bonding ceremony. As the sun set on that 4th day, they stood together in front of the fire, facing each other with solemn expressions. Shara had fashioned crude tokens from leather cord and carved wood, and Henrik had contributed 2 small rings he had inherited from his grandmother, silver bands worn smooth with age. Are you certain? Shara asked one final time. There is still time to change your mind. I have never been more certain of anything, Henrik replied. Shara Coldforge, I choose you. I choose this life with you, whatever it brings. Shara smiled, fierce and radiant. Then let us begin. The ceremony was simple but profound. They spoke the words Shara had taught him, old orc vows that spoke of protection and partnership, of strength shared and burdens halved. They exchanged tokens, Henrik tying the leather cord around Shara's wrist, while she slipped his grandmother's ring onto his finger. Then came the blood oath, a small cut on each of their palms pressed together, mingling their blood while they spoke the final binding words. By blood and choice, by word and deed, I am yours, Henrik said, his voice steady. By blood and choice, by word and deed, I am yours, Shara echoed. The moment the words were complete, something shifted in the air between them, a sense of rightness settling into Henrik's bones. Shara must have felt it too, because she released a breath she seemed to have been holding and pulled him into a kiss that was entirely different from their first. This was not desperate or uncertain, but claiming, a seal on the promise they had just made. They made love that night with the fire crackling beside them and the winter wind singing beyond the walls. Henrik explored every inch of Shara's green skin, traced the scars that marked her body, learned what made her gasp and sigh. Shara was equally thorough in her attentions, and Henrik discovered that, despite her strength, her touch could be remarkably gentle. They came together with a passion born of both desire and deep affection, and afterward lay tangled in each other's arms, neither willing to let go. My husband, Shara murmured against his chest, testing the word. My wife, Henrik replied, and felt her smile against his skin. They had 5 days of peace after the bonding. 5 days to settle into their new reality, to learn each other's rhythms and preferences, to build something that felt increasingly like a real partnership. Shara proved invaluable around the homestead, her strength making short work of tasks that would have taken Henrik twice as long. She cleared snow, reinforced the barn, and even began discussing plans for spring planting with an enthusiasm that warmed him. Henrik taught her to read, something she had never had the opportunity to learn in her clan, and watched with delight as she puzzled through the simple books he owned. In return, Shara taught him orc hand signals, a silent language that could communicate complex ideas with just a few gestures, useful for hunting or moments when speech would be dangerous. But on the 6th day, they both woke knowing their borrowed time was ending. The weather had cleared completely, and tracks through the snow would be easily visible now. If Shara's clan was searching, they would come soon. They did not have to wait long. Late that afternoon, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, Henrik spotted movement in the tree line. He counted 12 figures, all orc, all armed, moving toward the cabin with clear purpose. "They are here," he called to Shara, who was inside preparing the evening meal. She joined him at the window, her expression grim but not surprised. "That will be my brother leading them, Shara Coldforge. He is bound by honor to return me or die trying." "Can we reason with him?" Henrik asked, checking that his sword was loose in its sheath. "Perhaps, if we can prove the bond before he feels obligated to act. Once violence begins, there will be no talking our way out." They stepped out of the cabin together as the orc war party emerged from the trees, forming a semicircle around the small clearing. The leader was immediately identifiable, taller than the others and bearing a massive war axe. His face, so similar to Shara's but harder and more weathered, twisted with rage when he saw her. "Shara Coldforge," he roared, his voice carrying across the snow. "You have shamed our clan and broken sacred oaths. Come with us now, or we will take you by force and kill any who stand in our way." Shara stepped forward, head high despite the tremor Henrik could feel running through her. "I cannot return, Korath. I am bound to another now. This human is my husband by blood and choice. The old obligation is void." The orcs behind Korath muttered among themselves, and Henrik saw several exchange doubtful glances. Korath himself seemed taken aback, his axe lowering slightly. "That is impossible," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "No human would bond with one of us. And you could not complete the ceremony alone." "I am Henrik Brennan," Henrik announced, stepping up beside Shara and taking her hand. "And I assure you the bond is complete and genuine. Your sister came to me seeking shelter from the storm, and in the days we spent together, we found something neither of us expected. I love her, Shara Coldforge. I have spoken the vows and mingled my blood with hers. She is mine and I am hers, and I will defend that bond with my life if necessary." "Show me proof," Korath demanded, though his aggressive posture had eased considerably. Shara held up her wrist, displaying the leather cord Henrik had tied there, and Henrik showed his own marked palm, the cut still visible and healing. They spoke several phrases in the old orc tongue, demonstrating Henrik's knowledge of the ceremony. And finally, Shara pulled aside her collar to reveal a mark on her shoulder that Henrik had given her during their bonding night, a bite that had left a distinctive pattern. The orcs conferred among themselves in their own language, voices rising and falling in heated debate. Finally, Korath approached alone, stopping just a few paces from where Henrik and Shara stood. "If this bond is real," he said slowly, "then by our law, Shara's obligation to wed the war chief is indeed void, but the insult to his honor remains. He will demand compensation, likely in combat or blood price." "Then let him come," Henrik said. "I will face whatever challenge is required." "You do not understand," Korath said, and for the first time his expression softened slightly as he looked at his sister. "He will not come himself. He will send champions, or he will call for your head, Shara, as the only acceptable payment for the shame. Then we will face that together when it happens, Shara said firmly. But I am not leaving Henrik, and I am not going back. If that makes me an outcast from the clan, so be it. Korath was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between them. Then he did something unexpected. He drove the head of his axe into the snow and extended his hand to Henrik. "My sister has always been the bravest of us," he said. "And I can see in her eyes that she has chosen well, even if she has chosen strangely. I will not force her to return. But know this, Human the war chief will not be as understanding. You have perhaps a month, maybe 2, before he sends trouble your way. Use that time to prepare." Henrik clasped Korath's forearm in the warrior's grip, feeling the strength in the orc's grasp, but also something like grudging respect. "Thank you. And know that your sister will always have a home here, and you will always be welcome at our fire." Korath nodded, then turned to Shara. They spoke rapidly in their own language, words Henrik could not follow but whose emotion he could clearly read. There was anger there, yes, but also love and worry. Korath embraced his sister roughly, and Henrik saw Shara's eyes glisten with tears she would not let fall until her brother had gone. The war party departed as quickly as they had come, melting back into the forest until the clearing was empty once more save for Henrik and Shara. She stood staring after them for a long moment, then turned and buried her face in Henrik's chest. "I did not expect him to accept it," she said, her voice muffled. "I thought I would never see my family again." "You may still have to fight for this," Henrik reminded her gently. "The war chief will come, just as your brother said." "I know," Shara said, pulling back to look at him. "But we will face it. Together." "That was the promise, was it not?" "Always together," Henrik agreed. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Henrik and Shara fortified the cabin, preparing for the confrontation they both knew was inevitable. But they also lived, truly lived, in a way neither had experienced before. They laughed over shared meals, worked side by side during the day, and explored each other thoroughly during the long winter nights. Henrik had never been happier, and he could see the same truth reflected in Shara's eyes every time she looked at him. Spring began to show its first hints, ice melting from the eaves and the earliest green shoots pushing through the snow, when the war chief finally sent his answer. It came in the form of a single rider, a young orc bearing a challenge scroll sealed with blood. The terms were simple and brutal. Single combat, Henrik against a champion of the war chief's choosing, to take place at the spring equinox. If Henrik won, all debts would be considered paid and Shara would be free. If he lost, Shara would return to fulfill her original obligation, and Henrik's lands would be forfeit. "You do not have to accept this," Shara said after she had translated the formal challenge language. "We could head south like I originally planned, and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." Henrik shook his head. "No, we make our stand here. This is our home, Shara, our home. We do not abandon it because others cannot accept what we have built." "You have never fought an orc champion," Shara warned. "They are trained from birth for combat. Size, strength, endurance, they will have every advantage." "Except one," Henrik said with a slight smile. "I have something worth fighting for, and I have you to train me." The days leading up to the equinox were grueling. Shara drilled Henrik relentlessly, teaching him how to fight opponents larger and stronger than himself, showing him where orc armor had weaknesses, how to use speed and precision to counter brute force. They sparred from dawn until dusk, and more than once Henrik ended the day bruised and aching, but he could feel himself improving, feel his body remembering skills he had tried to forget. The night before the equinox, they did not train. Instead, they lay together in their bed, holding each other close, speaking in whispers of the future they hope to have. "If something happens to me tomorrow," Henrik started, but Shara pressed her fingers to his lips. "Nothing will happen. You will win because you must." "Because I cannot lose you, Henrik. I only just found you." "I love you," Henrik said, the words still feeling new and precious on his tongue. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that these past weeks with you have been the best of my life." "I love you too," Shara replied. "And tomorrow, we will prove to everyone that love is stronger than obligation, than tradition, than the violence men try to force upon the world." The equinox dawned clear and cold, and by mid-morning a crowd had gathered in the clearing Henrik and Shara had designated as the fighting ground. Orcs from Shara's clan mixed with a handful of curious humans from the nearest settlement, all come to witness this strange contest between worlds. The champion arrived with ceremony, a massive orc warrior named Groth who carried a sword nearly as tall as Henrik. He was scarred and battle-tested, his expression one of grim determination. But when he saw Shara standing at Henrik's side, something flickered in his eyes that might have been understanding. The rules were explained by a neutral elder from a different clan. First blood, submission, or death. No interference, no weapons save those agreed upon. Henrik had chosen a sword and a long dagger, weapons he knew intimately from his soldier days. Groth would fight with his massive blade and nothing else. They faced each other across the trampled snow, and Henrik felt time slow as it always had before battle. He could hear every breath, feel every heartbeat, see with perfect clarity the way Groth shifted his weight in preparation for the charge. The signal was given, and Groth came forward like an avalanche. Henrik did not meet the charge. Instead, he slipped sideways, letting Groth's momentum carry him past, and scored a shallow cut across the orc's arm as he passed. It was barely more than a scratch, but it served its purpose, proving Henrik was faster than he looked. Groth adjusted his tactics, becoming more cautious, and they circled each other warily. The orc champion had reach and power, but Henrik had trained for this. Every time Groth swung his massive sword, Henrik was already moving, dancing just out of range and darting in to land quick strikes whenever an opening appeared. The fight seemed to last forever and no time at all. Henrik felt the burn in his muscles, tasted copper where he had bitten his cheek, registered distantly that he was bleeding from a gash on his shoulder where Groth had gotten through his defense. But he kept moving, kept fighting, using every trick Shara had taught him and every lesson he had learned in his soldier days. Finally, he saw his opening. Groth overextended on a downward strike, and Henrik stepped inside his guard, using the orc's own momentum to throw him off balance. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, and Henrik ended up on top with his dagger pressed to Groth's throat. "Yield," Henrik panted. "I do not want to kill you, just yield." Groth stared up at him for a long moment, then laughed, a booming sound that echoed across the clearing. "I yield." "By the ancestors, human, you fight like a demon." Shara chose well. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and angry shouts. Henrik rolled off Groth and staggered to his feet, accepting the hand the orc champion offered. Then Shara was there, throwing her arms around him, and Henrik held her tight despite the pain in his shoulder. "It is done," she whispered. "We are free." The war chief's representative, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward with visible reluctance. "The debt is paid. By the old laws, the human has proven his claim. Shara Coldforge is released from all prior obligations." Not everyone was happy with this outcome. A faction of orcs, loyal to the war chief, muttered threats and dark predictions. But Korath was there with his own warriors, and the humans from the settlement had brought their militia captain, a grizzled veteran who made it clear that Henrik was one of their own and under their protection. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed. Some orcs approached to offer grudging congratulations or to speak with Shara in their own language. A few humans stayed to help Henrik back to the cabin, and the militia captain promised to spread word that this homestead was under official protection of the settlement. As the sun set that evening, Henrik and Shara sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the last of the visitors disappear into the trees. Henrik's shoulder was properly bandaged now, and though it ached fiercely, he felt a peace settle over him that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with the woman sitting beside him. "We did it," Shara said wonderingly. "We actually did it." "We did," Henrik agreed. "Though I am voting we never have to do anything like that again." Shara laughed, the sound free and joyful. "Agreed. From now on, our biggest battles will be against weeds in the garden and stubborn firewood." "I can live with that," Henrik said, taking her hand. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and Henrik thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A desperate woman fleeing an unwanted fate, a storm that had sealed them together, the slow building of trust and affection that had transformed into something neither had expected but both desperately needed. "Thank you," Shara said softly, "for being brave enough to let me in. For seeing past what I am to who I am." "Thank you for crashing through my door on that winter night," Henrik replied, "for reminding me that being alone is not the same as being at peace, and that sometimes the most unexpected things turn out to be exactly what we need." Shara leaned her head on his shoulder, and Henrik wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. Above them, stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, ancient and indifferent to the small dramas of the world below. But here, in this small clearing on the frontier between worlds, two people had found something precious and rare, a love that transcended expectation and prejudice, built on trust and sealed by choice. The winter had brought Shara to him, a runaway bride sought by hunters who would have dragged her back to a fate she could not accept. The storm had sealed them in together, giving them time to discover each other beyond the prejudices of their peoples. And by the Thaw, Henrik knew with absolute certainty that he would never let her go. They had faced her past and defeated it together. Now they would build their future the same way, side by side, partners in every sense of the word, proving with every day that love could bridge any divide and overcome any obstacle when two people were brave enough to choose each other again and again. As they finally rose to go inside, Shara paused to look back at the forest, at the path her clan had taken away from this place. Then she turned deliberately and took Henrik's hand, walking with him into their home, into their life together, into whatever adventures and challenges the future would bring. The door closed behind them, and smoke rose from the chimney into the night sky. Inside, by the warmth of their fire, Henrik and Shara held each other close, two souls who had found their home not in a place but in each other, bound by vows spoken in desperate hope, and proved true through trial and choice. Their story was just beginning, but the foundation was unshakable. Whatever came next, they would face it together, always together. That was the promise they had made, and neither of them had any intention of breaking it. The storm had brought them together, but it was love that would keep them together through all the seasons to come.